Um, we're very excited to kind of have a guest speaker on the topic of electric vehicles. Um, but if we can go to the next slide first, let me just explain uh, why we have this Lunch and Learn series. And primarily, this is an outgrowth from MBTA's Transportation Technology Strategic Plan, which includes 9 strategies related to different aspects of technology. And Kristen just posted a link to the webpage where you can find more information about the MBTA's Transportation Technology Strategic Plan. This session on electric vehicles is very much in line with our strategy number 8, which addresses decarbonization of the transportation system. It's very relevant to what we've done. MBTA has not just talked the talk, but also walked the walk on electrification. We've funded a number of procurements of electric transit vehicles in the city of Alexandria and also for Fairfax Connector. And looking forward to hearing more about broader aspects of electrification from today's speaker. We aim to keep these sessions brief out of respect for your time. So we target 45 minutes. If we run a little bit over, then feel free to drop off if you need to, but we will keep this fairly tightly timed. And we always target these sessions at folks like yourselves who are interested or engaged, actively engaged perhaps in the issue that's being discussed. One of the key kind of points about the usefulness of these lunch and learn sessions is the information that's shared, not just from our speaker to you, but also the feedback you can provide to our speaker and indeed to MBTA staff, because we're learning on this too. We don't profess to be experts on this. If we could go to the next slide, I'd like to introduce Amy Posner from the city of Alexandria. And I'm just going to just very briefly give you some background on Amy. She is an electric vehicle planner at the city of Alexandria. There may not be too many jurisdictions in our region that even have an electric vehicle planner. So, kudos to the city of Alexandria for this. Some of her responsibilities include acting as a clearinghouse for information and resources related to EV charging, especially for residents in multifamily buildings, and working with condo associations and others to share, technical assistance opportunities and so on regarding best practices and incentives that may be available from federal government, Dominion Energy, or others to get things going. Before I hand off to Amy, I would like just to quickly ask Griffin to go ahead and start us off with a quick poll. You'll have about 15 seconds to respond, and then from there we'll hand over to Amy, and we'll come back in about 15 or 20 minutes with another poll, and hopefully ample opportunity for folks to ask questions and get answers. So Griffin, take it away. I think you're on mute.
I was due for one of those. Started sharing the poll, already getting some results in, but I'll just read off the question. What do you consider to be the most significant barrier to widespread adoption of EVs in your jurisdiction? So I'll just keep a couple more seconds up to get in some results there. Looks like we've tailed off on participation. I'll end it here, share the results, And it looks like a good spread of answers here, just all across the board. High purchase cost of EVs leading the way, along with limited availability of charging infrastructure. So interesting results. I'm sure Amy's presentation will address some, if not all of these. So looking forward to that. And we'll go ahead and have Amy start her presentation.
Thanks, Griffin. Thanks, Keith. And thank you all for having me today. Really appreciate it. I have a pretty froggy voice. I caught COVID over the weekend, but we're going to power through. If I say anything weird, I'll just blame it on that. Yeah, I'm going to take you through today just, I don't, all the different kind of strategies that we're working on at the city of Alexandria to really support EV adoption in the community and to meet the current and future charging needs. We're going to talk about kind of publicly accessible charging, home charging for folks without driveways and garages, and also a few slides on some of our fleet activities. And I just want to start that all of our EV related activities are guided by our electric vehicle charging infrastructure readiness strategy, or EVRS. And it's, a compilation of over 30 recommendations for how the city can, really meet our goals of, getting to 100% of new vehicle sales to be electric by 2050. And I will say, for municipalities that are considering doing a similar plan, or if you have already, this has really been invaluable for like applying for grants, because it also includes an analysis of like the number of chargers that are needed over time. And, it showed us that we were in a deficit for public chargers, in 2021 when we published this. So it really had some critical narrative to like demonstrate the need for why we need grant funding for chargers, in certain areas. So definitely recommend, folks exploring doing a report like this. So the next slide, I'm going to get into some of the publicly accessible charging activities that we have going on. So the next slide. So this is one of the charts that we have in our EVRS that shows the number of ports for publicly accessible charging over time. We looked at kind of different policy scenarios. This is kind of the strongest local and federal policy levels that would kind of drive the fastest adoption of EVs. And so, something that we had to figure out is like, what is a city's role in meeting these charging needs? Am I going to be responsible for installing 800 level 2 plugs by 2050? No, the private industry is definitely going to play a role in that as well. So, the city has not installed any publicly accessible chargers to date. I'll get to kind of what we're doing in that realm now, but I had to kind of consider, we know we are in a deficit from this analysis. So, kind of thinking, since we're still earlier on in EV adoption, setting a goal of kind of meeting 50% of the charging ports that are needed, for the next 10 years, and then expecting that to kind of taper off over time as more and more like private entities, are interested in installing chargers as amenities for customers, for visitors, things like that. We want to ensure, equitable distribution across the city. Putting a charger in a Justice 40 community doesn't make it easier for someone in that community to buy an EV. It doesn't make EVs cheaper. So we want to ensure that we're, yes, ensuring that all the resources are equitably distributed, but also being realistic. And what does it mean to provide benefits to our disadvantaged communities in the city? Most of our looking at kind of the distribution of EVs in Alexandria, it's a lot of the zip codes with our folks the folks live in Old Town and Delray. So we need to meet their needs, but also making sure that we provide equal access to everyone. So we issued a request for industry information in October of last year to ask questions about different business models and approaches for fleet charging and publicly accessible charging. And based on the responses that we got over 25 responses from different firms that had a range of different business models. And so what we went forward with was we issued a franchise solicitation for public chargers that would be installed at no cost to the city. So basically in this model, the vendor would finance, design, build, own, operate, and maintain for the length of the charger. They would collect, they'll collect the fees for usage, and in some cases there would be a revenue split, with the city. So that franchise solicitation is open right now, and bids are due next Friday. So on the next slide, I have just kind of a summary of a couple of different terms that we have and the approach that we took. This is on our website right now, and if there's anything that y'all are interested in learning more about, I am happy to share, any and all of the resources that we have. I'm sure some of your municipalities are working on some of these exact same issues and types of projects. So I'm happy to share any of the learnings that we've done, or any of the draft documents. So all the terms are going to be finalized with the selected vendor, but this is kind of just a summary of how we're approaching some of the higher level issues. So something that we learned from our conversations with the vendors was that, generally vendors would need anywhere from a 7 to 20-year term to pay back their investment of installing the chargers. So anything that would obligate property for more than 5 years in Virginia, you have to do a franchise agreement. So our franchise, the initial term is going to be at least 10 years. And then you have the option for 5-year renewals up to a total of 40 years. Again, there'll be a sold at no cost to the city, but we did make sure that the solicitation is compliant with the federal funding, the federal procurement guidelines. So any grant funding that we might get in the future, we apply for a CFI every year. We apply for lots of different grants for public charging, that we can kind of funnel that funding through this agreement. And vendors are required to, share what kind of revenue sharing options that they have, if any, with the city. So that could be like a fixed rent, kind of a variable fee, like based on the usage of the chargers, or in kind. Generally, there are some vendors that will rely on advertising revenue. So there's sometimes an opportunity to provide some of that advertising space to the city for like PSAs. So our charger locations, it's all city-owned parking lots. So our parking garages, our libraries, parks, rec centers. And so we're requiring vendors to basically conduct an analysis. We gave them all the information, location. We took pictures of the electrical panels, and kind of gave them an idea of where chargers could go, that sort of thing, to give them as much information as possible. And they're required to submit a kind of initial siting plan that will summarize what locations they want to install chargers in. And kind of in that first, we're calling it kind of a 2-year first phase of that 10-year initial term. And, kind of going back to the equitable distribution of chargers, my assumption is that the parking garages in Old Town are going to be very attractive to vendors. And so, in order to get chargers in other areas of the city, having grant funding applied is going to be one way that we can do that. So, we're going to continue to apply for grants to make sure that we can spread the chargers out throughout the city. And so one thing we also wanted to make sure was that, sorry, I took a cough break, Griffin, you can go back. I'll just cover the last two. We wanted to make sure that we had some flexibility with sites. If the vendor doesn't have any intention to install chargers on a specific location, but maybe it's of interest to the city to do so, we're hoping to include some terms that will give us that option. And we're also requiring that vendors indicate the minimum number of chargers that they're committed to installing in that first 2-year term and throughout the 10 years. So, and it's just a part of the evaluation. All right, now I'm ready for you to go to the next slide. So yeah, we modeled that franchise after Virginia Beach's franchise. They issued theirs earlier this year. So yeah, hopefully that will help us get a number of public chargers throughout the city. So switching gears to home chargers, this map, I know it's hard to see, but the orange parcels are single family homes that do not have a driveway or a garage. So they're, you know, a lot of this is in Old Town Alexandria and in Del Rey. We also have a number of condo associations that that also rely on a lot of street parking that aren't shown on this map. So you know, we knew we were in deficit of public chargers, and we know we have a big population of folks that can't charge at home because they don't have a driveway or garage. And so we know we needed to get more folks are going to rely on public charging. If they can't charge at home, they're going to rely on workplace charging. We also wanted to explore options for right-of-way charging. And we also have our historic districts are marked on this map too. So that we're also is a big consideration for any right-of-way charging that we're doing. So we're looking at 2 pilots. The first one is on the next slide is allowing folks to cross the sidewalk with oh, sorry, yeah, don't click on the picture. It's linked. Thanks. Is to cross the sidewalk with a level 1 cable that's covered by a highly visible ADA compliant cord ramp. So I'm not aware of any other municipality in Virginia that allows this right now. So it's something we were looking at, you know, DC, Cambridge, Massachusetts, Portland, Vancouver, you know, they all have programs that allow you to do this. This kind of exploration is a really big challenge. I mean, basically nobody likes this approach, but it is something that we see a lot already. It's not currently allowed in the city, but you know, we see folks daisy chaining extension cords coming out of their 2nd story window across the sidewalk. So it's unsafe. It's not covered by an appropriate cord ramp. So, you know, we're trying to evaluate, you know, what is the best way to prevent that behavior, but also, you know, get a program that is like simple and easy and, you know, for our residents to comply with. And something we found out, you know, is that a lot of times you'll see those kind of really short ADA like cord ramps, but the charging cords, basically the crossover point is if the whole installation is over 1/2 inch. And generally the EV charging cords are over 1/2 inch. So that kicks you to these bigger ADA ramps. So to get something that would cover the entire sidewalk, you need multiple pieces of kind of what you see here. It's going to run you a couple $100 to do this. And, you know, it's the type of thing where you'd have to remove it, you know, from the sidewalk when it's not in use. And so it's just, there's some logistical concerns and, you know, trying to figure out, you know, DC doesn't require, it's not a pilot. They just have some guidance and you can kind of just do this and following the guidance. But, you know, with Alexandria, we wanted to kind of take it a step further. If we do move forward with a program like this, to kind of make it more of a permit application where we would require documentation that you would have the proper level of insurance, the proper ramp, you have to get inspections, you know, so that our fire department was kind of comfortable with this. You can't use extension cords. So it's like, you know, it's a very difficult process to kind of get everyone in the process kind of comfortable with doing something like this. So it's still kind of we are not there yet, but yes, we're also kind of focusing on the other side of this, which on the next slide is the more permanent curbside chargers. That approach, everyone has kind of because there's no safety, there's less of a safety risk, right? There's no exposed cords, everything's installed underground. These would be publicly accessible chargers installed curbside. They, you know, ideally we'd want to do a similar approach as with the public charging, where it'd be installed at no cost to the city or the property owners adjacent. It was a kind of similar revenue sharing options. And some things that are also important to us is because a lot of these areas that need these are in historic districts. is kind of this minimalistic bollard style design. Like you see here, this is a company called It's Electric. We are a partner with It's Electric on a Department of Energy grant that they were awarded. As soon as we can figure out a program, that they are eligible for, we can work with them on that grant. So they also have that European style where the cord stays with you in your vehicle, so that there's less clutter on the right of way. And if someone comes by, vandalizes the charger, cuts a cable, you don't take the entire charger out of service. You can still, other folks can still use the charger itself. So, so we're looking at an opportunity to do like a licensing agreement with multiple vendors up to 5 years, so we don't have to trigger that franchise agreement. But we know that there's we are in a need for, this overnight charging option for folks to charge at home, as well as the public chargers at our own, on our city facilities. And I think I have one more slide on kind of home charging with respect to multifamily dwellings on the next slide. So about 50% of our community live in multifamily dwellings, and it's such a mixed bag with the different buildings. We have some really old buildings, some kind of newer complexes. And so there's really not a one size fits all for folks wanting to install chargers. In some cases, there's like no way to install a charger kind of with their existing utility infrastructure. So, the approaches for implementation are so varied. So kind of what we've done to date is we've established an electric vehicle charging peer group. So there's about 25 condo associations that are in it right now. We started in last November. We meet about quarterly, and we've had presentations from different charging vendors, from Dominion Energy on their incentive program, the fire department, and other condo associations that have installed chargers, since the group has started. So it's been it's a really, really great group. I love this peer group. They are really, really engaged. There's such great discussion because it's, everyone's trying to kind of figure it out with how to deal with the Virginia's right to charge law. Like with their residents trying to kind of install outlets and things in their deeded spaces, and how to navigate that. But instead, like offering charging in the shared parking spaces, kind of what's the best way to do that, and how to take into account everyone's concerns, like future EV owners, folks that never want to own an EV. How are these paid for? How are you paying back your investment? So it's been really beneficial for all these different associations, just kind of hear how other people are approaching it and kind of different challenges that they're experiencing. And like, what's the technology like that you should be considering to help you figure out, how do you go about it? So we're going to release a needs survey soon to not just the peer group folks, but all multifamily dwellings in Alexandria, to really understand like what's the next step besides this peer group. What are resources, what are programs that would be really beneficial? I know Fairfax County has a great program where they have a vendor to do site assessments for a handful of multifamily dwellings a year, to help them figure out like how many chargers, where would they go, that sort of thing. So seeing like if that type of program, or maybe something else, some sort of like joint procurement support or something would be the most beneficial to get more multifamily chargers in our buildings. So I have just 2 more slides on kind of our fleet side of things. So our transit bus agency Dash is the largest for now zero emission bus fleet in Virginia and the DC region. So we have 14 battery electric buses, and we also were awarded a LONO award from FTA last year for 13 more. And I think they've got funding for maybe a handful more. But so as a part of that LONO also, complementary to it, we are in the procurement phases to build a battery electric bus depot charging expansion. And the facility, it's going to be an overhead depot charging facility, because we've struggled with in the main facility, kind of there's 6 chargers in the main bus depot now. We've really tapped out the existing electrical capacity. So Dominion is building a 3 megawatt expansion as a part of the Lono Award for kind of the next incremental phase of kind of the zero emission bus deployment. And also doing all the chargers are going to be on the roof of the facility. We have a lot of flooding issues all throughout Alexandria. So in the Dash facility, the current chargers are on like a 2-foot platform to get them up kind of out of any sort of flooding issues. But something else interesting that Dash is working on, we volunteered to be a pilot for this bus exportable power systems project the FTA is funding. So there's a company called Inventive. They are developing, they were awarded a grant from FTA to develop this bespoke inverter that would allow you to plug a zero emission bus directly into a building that has like a generator hookup. And so they're doing 2 pilots as a part of that program. The battery electric bus pilot will be with Dash, and they're doing a fuel cell pilot in Flint, Michigan. So these are generally like lower powered buildings that are suitable for this application. But we're kind of always looking for different opportunities to incorporate, our zero emission buses as some sort of resilience strategy. So this could be an interesting way to explore how we can do like a vehicle to building pilot that doesn't involve kind of bidirectional charging, which I think is kind of the other approach that folks are exploring now. And on our school bus side, we have 15 battery electric buses and 2 more covered under this year's EPA's electric school bus rebate program. And so all of the chargers for our school buses were installed by Dominion at no cost. And some of y'all may be also a part of this program, but they, by entering into an agreement with Dominion for the buses to be a vehicle to grid resource if needed, with that agreement, then Dominion installed the chargers for free. So it's been and they're all DC fast chargers. So it's been a really great opportunity program for that. Then I've got one more slide on our city fleet. So our city has the goal in our environmental action plan to be 100% zero emission for the fleet to be 100% zero emission by fiscal year 2040. Dash has set a slightly more aggressive goal of being 100% zero emission by 2037. But so in order, we just kicked off a fleet transition study a few months ago to kind of put together a plan for, what's the purchasing look like in order for us to meet that goal for all of our vehicles, for our heavy duty vehicles, for our first responder vehicles, police, fire, what does that look like? And how do we phase charging in order to be the most cost effective way and to make sure that, we stay ahead of the vehicle purchases when it comes to charging. We don't want to have, and we definitely have had this happen before. It's happening right now. Where vehicles show up and we don't have a charger for where that vehicle parks, and installing chargers takes a long time. Procurements take forever. So, this fleet transition study is going to really help us understand what are the full costs of what it's going to take to do that transition, and what does a charging installation have to look like? What do we actually need for these vehicles? Alexandria is really small. Most of our vehicles only get like 25 miles a day. So, we can do a lot of charge sharing. Not every vehicle needs its own charger, with the exception of probably some of our heavy duty vehicles. So this fleet transition study is really going to help us make kind of smart economic decisions moving forward. And we're also exploring a workplace charging program for our staff where we would let city employees use the chargers for their personal vehicles when they're not being used by the city fleet. Like the fleet vehicles are going to be out in the field during the day, and when city employees can charge their personal vehicles at that time. So the city staff, under the kind of the current draft policy that we're working on, would be charged a fee, and it's just to cover the electricity and like the 10% transaction fee. I think it comes out to like 14 cents, 15 cents a kilowatt hour, which is still a pretty good deal. So we're hoping to get that through to be a benefit to our staff. So I think that's all I have. I'm happy to take any questions. And I'd love to hear other things y'all are working on too.
Yeah, wonderful, Amy. Thanks so very much for packing so much information into such a short period of time, but being so clear about what the city is doing. I'm very impressed. I think before we dive into the Q&A, Griffin has got another poll, but I would encourage any of our participants who have a question to type those into the chat box. We do have a number of questions that were submitted with your registration forms. If we can get through all the questions in a reasonable amount of time, we'll try and do that. Obviously, we're dependent on Amy's willingness to do that. But if there are questions that we cannot get to, then we'll try and do a follow-up afterwards. But let's Griffin take over the poll.
Sure, just put up the second poll here. Based on the information presented, what do you believe is the most promising strategy for expanding EV charging infrastructure in your jurisdiction? We have PPPs, government funding incentives, multifamily charging, right-of-way charging. So that's essentially street curbside parking or curbside charging, and residential and workplace charging, as well as other, and you can leave your response in the chat box. So I'll just give that a few more seconds. Go ahead and share those results. So PPPs leading the way, 40% of votes there. Seconded by residential and workplace charging. Then we have government funding and incentives, and lastly, multifamily charging. So good array of results there. Yeah, it would be interesting to see what kind of PPPs could be in the works, maybe with shopping centers, gas stations, things of that sort, mixed-use residential areas, just popular points of interest. I could definitely see that happening, where people tend to live and work. Those could be ideal places for infrastructure. So I'll stop sharing those results, and I'll get to actually some of the pre-form questions. We asked that you, when you registered, just to provide some questions if you had any, and I'll get started with some of those. This one is from City of Falls Church employee. We have, what sources of funding have you used? And how have you navigated federal regulations for EV fleet and charging projects?
We are really hoping to get some federal funding. MWCOG, their CFI application, their round one CFI application was awarded, and we were included in that application for one of our sites, which is great. So we are getting some federal funding to install chargers at 4 Mile Run Park. And we're also taking advantage of the IRS direct pay benefits. So for our fleet vehicles and our fleet chargers. So I don't remember the exact amount of the incentive, but it's like a guaranteed. There's no kind of like, is if your project meets the requirements, your entity can get a direct payment back from the IRS for deploying different commercial clean fuel vehicles and chargers if they're in specific census tracts. So, other than federal funding, we really are relying on our capital improvement budget, which we do have a line item in our capital improvement plan for citywide EV charging projects. So, it's so expensive to install chargers, it can be. And so in order to kind of preserve a lot of that federal funding for our fleet chargers, which we're hoping to kind of dedicate a lot of that capital funding to, which is why we went down the approach for it's getting a vendor to kind of finance our public chargers, do that installation at no cost. But yeah, I mean, it's very expensive, and especially some of these heavy duty vehicles, you're looking at vehicles that are at least still twice as expensive as their fossil fuel counterpart. So federal funding is definitely needed. I'm not aware of too many funding opportunities for the fleet charging and vehicles, except the EPA's medium and heavy duty vehicle program, which I think launched earlier this year. So I'm hoping that there will be more, but that's the only one that I'm aware of right now.
Okay, that's good to know. We have another one from Fairfax DOT. What are the infrastructure? This is just an employee from the Fairfax DOT, by the way. What are the infrastructure limitations? And you kind of spoke to this in your presentation of the limitations for charging infrastructure, as well as does the power grid need to be bolstered with renewable energy sources, which you touched on a little bit there.
Yeah, I mean, Dominion basically has told us, we've reached out to them a lot and and kept them informed of our plans for our fleet, because our fleet vehicles, like I would say 80% of the city's fleet plus Dash plus the school district, they're all in within 2 blocks of each other. So if those are all electric, that's a huge service need that we would huge power draw if everything is battery electric. So we've kept Dominion abreast of kind of what our plans are, what our timelines are. They've basically, excuse me, they've told us that, I mean, they want to sell the electrons. They'll build whatever we need. It's just like, what would we be on the hook for to pay? So this Dash upgrade I mentioned, we got grant funding to pay for that piece, but sorry. But yeah, it's so it's I think there's a lot of news out there about how the grid can't support all electric vehicles, and I think it's we want the grid to get greener. So there's we want having like grid scale renewables, I think is necessary and important. But I think I think it's a little overblown. I think the grid will be able to get there, and it's not, it'll take time. It's not easy, but but yeah, I mean, I think just work with your utility and make sure they know what you're planning.
Okay, yeah, I find that really interesting because that kind of and I'll use my co-host privileges here. I think I'll ask a question in particular that I have. I guess we understand that electrification of the fleet is really important, and that we also at the same time we want to decrease the fleet overall. So we mentioned that EV ownership is pretty expensive. And mining for that grid is also expensive. So ultimately, what I'm thinking we need to decrease, I guess, vehicle miles traveled overall, and kind of encourage, active transportation use. I'm a bike guy, so it's trips like that, transit use. So I'm interested if you or the city may have any thoughts on that.
I mean, the city of Alexandria, their goal is to reduce, single occupancy vehicle trips. That's really number one goal. We want to make it safer for folks to bike, to walk, have accessible transit options. And if you need a vehicle, we want it to be an EV. But yeah, and it's also just not feasible that I mean, EVs aren't, no one really thinks of EVs generally as an equity solution, but the equity solution is not everybody gets an EV. They're expensive. Having a car in general is a privilege. So it's, there will be opportunities for us to, because if we get any revenue share from this vendor that we partner with, from chargers with the IRS direct pay funding that we're getting, we're exploring opportunities of how do we best use that money to kind of invest in the community. So yeah, I mean, I think that is the best goal, is reducing single occupancy vehicle trips. And if you have to have a car, we want it to be electric, and we want there to be somebody else in there with you.
Completely understandable. So we have a couple more questions from the preform. How can the city safeguard the EV equipment and technology against extreme weather caused by climate change, such as heat waves and flooding? And this question is from Karamova.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned we get a lot of flooding in Alexandria, and so for those, like, you can build chargers higher, but generally, like, the actual equipment is pretty waterproof, and like the electronics are like pretty high up on the equipment already. So yeah, doing some sort of flooding analysis when you're installing chargers would be good. And with extreme heat, I mean, I'm speaking a little bit out of turn here, but I mean, I think that there are like temperature ranges where it's less beneficial or to charge or not possible to charge. EVs, I think I've heard about this like in Phoenix when it's like 120 degrees that you can't charge the vehicle. Like the batteries are too hot, it won't accept the charge. And so yeah, I mean, if you're installing chargers indoors, like that could be another option, or just having a plan for you know when to charge in those, how to use the vehicles in that situation, because you're also you've got a lot less range and it's really hot and really cold days too.
Okay, and I'll wrap up with some of the preform questions before we move on to some of the chat questions. What are the operational benefits and challenges that Dash has seen by incorporating EVs into their fleet?
Yeah, I mean, people love the EVs. They're quiet, they're more efficient. They're new buses, and the drivers really like them. They're quiet. People on board tend to be quieter when the bus is quiet, and I've learned about in the school buses as well. I believe there has been some fuel cost savings. I can follow up. I can't speak to that too specifically, but I think that's right. But they really, so far, they've been a one-to-one replacement for the buses. They're because of some of the routes that they're on. They do come back for a midday charge. But some of the challenges we're anticipating are like maybe some of these longer routes, where a lot of times Dash is a close 24-hour service. And so some of these buses are out on the road. Some of these diesel buses now are out on the road for like 16 hours. So a battery electric bus generally can't do that. So figuring out, like, with a full fleet of electric buses, how does that work? Are we expanding the fleet? Are we redesigning routes? So when I don't know exactly where that crossover point is for when that needs to be the considerations. But we're looking into things like on-route charging, opportunity charging, and different kind of route design strategies to to how to best utilize a fully electric fleet.
Awesome. And so we'll have Alyssa kind of read off some of these chat questions. I realize we may have gone a little longer than anticipated. Is it okay if we keep you here, Amy, if you have time?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, awesome. And if people need to jump off, perfectly fine. This will be recorded and put up on YouTube later. We respect everyone's time, but we'll just try to finish up with some of these last few chat questions.
All right. Thank you again, Amy, for that presentation. That was really exciting to hear about everything that the city is doing regarding EV. We just have 3 questions in the chat at the moment. One of them you've already basically addressed about grid capacity and your collaboration with Dominion. So I'll move on to the other 2. And one you've already kind of addressed a little bit as well, and that is, can you talk about your considerations for installing curbside chargers? Is there a worry that it might lock in parking as the use for that curbside space? I know you already talked about utilities and then environmental concerns. Is there anything else that you keep in mind?
And I will say the parking is interesting. I mean, we get so many parking complaints in Alexandria, as I guess I would assume most of the rest of y'all do as well. But we are thinking about reserving an adjacent street space for EV charging. DC has a curbside charging pilot permitting program, and they do reserve the space for EVs only. So we are looking into, is this something that we should do? Because, in areas where parking is so competitive as well, if I'm asking a vendor to install a charger at no cost, that it'll be more attractive to that vendor if we're going to reserve that space for EV parking only, at least overnight. So there's a lot of pros and cons to doing this, but that is something that we are looking into and thinking about. And we're trying to figure out how do we kind of disaggregate residential versus commercial streets. So, we were looking at using VDOT designated minor streets as streets that would be eligible for curbside charging. And then, trying to figure out are we going to designate specific areas, or how many chargers can be on each block? Because some vendors, they want to have at least 2 on each block, one on each side for vehicles that have the port on the right versus the left. Or just kind of leaving it up to the vendors to site as they see fit. But the reserve parking is a big one.
Thank you, Matt, for bringing that up. That question was from Matt Beauty from DRPT. The next question you just briefly touched on, so you did the perfect transition to it. It's from Bob Pecora from Fairfax County DOT, and was asking about if there is a particular number of chargers per location that you're trying to do, and how you would enforce the fair use of public chargers. When the vehicle is charged and they're not moved, would you tow them? Things like that.
Yeah, it's a great question. So we don't have a number of chargers per location.
I'm so sorry, Amy. It looks as though your connection is cutting out. You may wish to go off camera to answer this final question.
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you just fine.
Okay. Amy may come back in, and I hope she does. But while we're waiting for that, could we just go to the next slide? Which is going to be one of 2 wrap-up slides. The next sessions are as stated here in November and December. We're not holding a session in October because we hope that you'll consider participating in our 9th annual Northern Virginia Transportation Roundtable scheduled for October 9th in person at our offices. I believe Kristen has just posted a link to that. The theme is artificial intelligence and dynamic incentivization, the future of transportation. So please give that some thought and go to that link if you'd like to register. And next slide. I should say for those upcoming sessions, we don't, we're working with a couple of speakers, but we don't have those finalized yet, but those dates are finalized. Finally, if you'd like to connect with us over any of our channels, go to this QR code and you can subscribe to various things from MBTA at that location. See a message, looks like we have lost Amy, so we're going to have to wrap this session here. I'd like to extend my thanks to all of our participants for sticking with us and going slightly beyond our 45-minute cutoff. We really appreciate the engagement, the feedback, and the questions. And look out for the posting of this session on our YouTube channel later this afternoon. Feel free to follow up with myself or Griffin after this event if you have any other questions, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day. Bye for now.